The heart of the desert is a place where the wind carries secrets of lives cast into the oblivion, drowned by the sands of time. Here, beneath the unyielding sun, we will uncover 3 different desert disappearances which have woven the tapestry of this mysterious place. Welcome to Mirage and Mystery. Our first story takes place back in the fall of 1996. On the morning of October 21st, a man by the name of David Brenner, a ranger in Death Valley National Park, was scouting the desert by helicopter in search of drug labs which might be operating in the area. Death Valley, as the name suggests, experiences some of the harshest weather conditions on the planet and is often considered to be the hottest place on Earth. The area also contains extreme terrain surrounded by mountains. In short, it's not somewhere you want to get lost. At around 11 o'clock a.m., David spotted something that confused him down on the ground. He looked down at what appeared to be a small vehicle of some kind. Even given his task of searching for illegal drug activity, what he was looking at didn't make any sense. First of all, the vehicle, seated in the wash of Anvil Canyon, was in an area without any legal roads headed to it. Second, again, it appeared to be a small road vehicle. An ATV or some other capable means of transportation might have been able to traverse the desert, but certainly not what he was looking at. Upon landing the helicopter a short distance away and approaching the vehicle, he was shocked to find that it was a measly passenger van. A green 1996 Plymouth Voyager, to be exact. It had clearly become stuck in the sand and had 3 flat tires, which appeared to have been driven on even after being punctured, for approximately 2 miles. All of its doors were locked. Even though this clearly was going to happen at some point during the van's journey out into the desert, it seemed to have gotten surprisingly far for the van's capabilities, considering how extremely remote of an area the vehicle had been found in. David Brenner relayed the California license plate back to the headquarters of Death Valley National Park, who looked up the plate with the California Highway Patrol. This uncovered the fact that the Los Angeles Police Department had actually reported the van as stolen a little over a month earlier on the 10th of September. It was also discovered that the vehicle was a rental and had been rented to 4 German tourists in Los Angeles way back in early July, 3 months prior to its discovery in the desert. So, who were the 4 German tourists, and how did their van end up all the way out in the middle of the desert? The family consisted of 34-year-old Egbert Rimkus, his 11-year-old son George Weber, Rimkus's 27-year-old girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, and her 4-year-old son, Max Meyer. According to their flight records, the family flew into the United States on the 8th of July, landing at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, before making a second flight down the West Coast to Los Angeles International Airport. After their arrival in California, the family made their way to Dollar Rent-A-Car, where they ordered the minivan. Records then indicate that after a brief visit in San Clemente, the family then drove around 300 miles to Las Vegas, Nevada, where they booked a room at the Treasure Island Hotel and Casino. The family stayed in the area for several days before departing from the hotel on the 22nd of July, driving all the way to Death Valley National Park. The family spent their first night in the park camping out in a canyon near Telescope Peak. During the search efforts, evidence of the family was discovered within an abandoned mining camp in the area. Inside was a box attached to a metal pole containing a guest book which visitors could sign. An entry written in German and dated July 23, 1996, was signed Connie, Egbert, George, and Max. The family had booked a flight from Los Angeles back to Germany for the 27th of July, just a few days later, but they never made their flight, and there is no evidence to suggest that they ever returned to Germany, or even left the country for that matter. Heike Weber, Rimkis's ex-wife, began to worry after contact with her ex-husband and son dropped off, and they failed to return home from the United States. After the discovery of the van, the search team was able to get inside of the vehicle, discovering a brand new Coleman sleeping bag, a tent, several toys, as well as an unused tire jack. A massive search was executed with hundreds of rescue workers canvassing the area surrounding the van. However, despite their efforts, the search failed to discover any clues in relation to the family's disappearance, despite a single beer bottle which was uncovered 1 mile away from the location of the van. A nearby ledge seemed to have a seat mark, indicating that one of the tourists had used it for shade. After around a week of searching, the authorities called off the search for the family on the 26th of October. There would be no new developments for the next 13 years. It had been a long time since the family's vacation. The remaining years of the 1990s came and went. The world went on after entering into a new millennium. History moved forward. The extended family of the German tourists went on, unsure of exactly what fate the four faced while inside the park. But still, it seemed as though the family had never left the desert. They hadn't. In November 2009, Les Walker and Tom Ahood, two off-duty search and rescue personnel, were hiking through the area looking for traces of the family. Bones. Human bones. Those of two separate adults, a male and a female, were found exactly 5 miles away from the location of the van. Nearby, identification belonging to the missing tourists was also discovered, including Cornelia's passport and bank ID. A journal containing German and a wine bottle were also found in the area. DNA was soon recovered from the bones of the male, which were confirmed to be those of Rimkis. Strangely, the remains of the children were never officially discovered, though the single sole of a shoe was found nearby. Mahood, one of the hikers who discovered the remains of the two adults, proposed that the family may have attempted to take a shortcut to Yosemite National Park through Death Valley before realizing they had completely underestimated the extreme terrain of the area and becoming stuck in the wash near the mountain. It's possible that the family then traveled on foot towards a nearby military base where they may have expected to find a well-patrolled perimeter. This is something that they may have come to expect in Germany. However, military bases in the southwestern United States typically are not secured in this way. After making their journey through the desert, which reached a scorching 116 degrees Fahrenheit that July, the family likely succumbed to heat stroke, dehydration, and a lack of shelter halfway to the perimeter of the base. Imagine that you have just been trying to drive your family of 4 through Death Valley National Park, and you find yourself in the middle of the desert, surrounded by mountains, with absolutely no idea where you are or where to go. And imagine that you're just absolutely being pounded by the sun. It's like 115 degrees outside, and all of your family, your girlfriend, their kids are all looking up at them wondering, how are we going to get out of this? We're counting on you to get us out of here. And I just imagine him eventually coming to a stop with them all glaring up at him when he finally realizes that none of them are ever leaving. It's a very tragic case, and the only mystery that we're left with now is wondering what those final moments were like for the family. May they rest in peace. Things had been a little turbulent for April Pitzer back in 2004. A 30-year-old woman living in Texas, she had recently ended her marriage with her husband, Chase Pitzer. In what surely was a distressing series of events, April lost custody of her 2 children and was now completely on her own. Seeking a fresh start following the separation, she headed to the small town of Newberry Springs, California, located in the western Mojave Desert, to begin a new, independent life. In conversation with her mother, she informed her that she had started working as a waitress and that things were going all right. However, after some time of living on her own, April came to the conclusion that she missed her 2 daughters and wanted to reconcile things with her ex-husband, Chase. So, on June 28, 2004, a friend of hers in California named Chuck Hollister drove April around to the homes of her friends to say her goodbyes, before dropping her off at the bus station so she could head back to her mother's home in Arkansas. Except, when the bus arrived in Arkansas, April wasn't on board. Her mother, Gloria, immediately reached out to a family friend living in California, but was unable to locate April. It was as though she had completely vanished. To properly tell the story of April Pitzer, we need to back up quite a while, actually, all the way back to the mid-1990s. April, 22 at the time, was still living in Arkansas with her mother. At the beginning of her modeling career, she appeared to have a very bright future ahead. Things were going good. On one particular night, after departing from the bar, several bad decisions were made, which, directly or indirectly, would permanently alter the course of her life. Her first mistake: driving under the influence. Her second, she had passengers with her in the car, 2 girls she had recently made acquaintances with. She offered to drive each of them home. However, both of these girls were in possession of methamphetamine. Needless to say, all 3 girls were arrested and taken to the police station. Now, obviously, this was a pretty terrible situation to be in, and it seemed as though April's entire blossoming future could be ripped away from her all at once. However, at least at the time, it seemed that she might have the opportunity to get out of this whole dilemma unscathed. Although the same couldn't be said for her friends, technically, April didn't have any drugs in her personal possession, and because the DUI was her first and only criminal offense, the cops offered her a lifeline. They discussed information they had regarding a local drug ring and suggested that should she infiltrate the ring and become an informant for the police, all charges would be dropped. Now, the ethics behind this were questionable at best. Sure, obviously this sounds amazing for her because she's 22 years old at the beginning of this amazing modeling career, and she almost lost it all to this charge. However, that doesn't change the fact that this was extremely reckless on the police's part. I mean, she's, again, only 22, and they're sending her in to infiltrate a drug ring, kind of holding her freedom and her life over her head. Nonetheless, left to choose between her career and a criminal offense, she chose to help the police. Things would go south very quickly. Within a very short period of time, rumors started to float around the drug ring in regards to April being an informant. This apparently made its way back to the police, who decided it would be best if she left town for her own safety. April ended up leaving Arkansas and moved to Texas. There, she would fall in love with the man who would later become her husband, Chase Pitzer. Life would be smooth for the couple for several years, during which they would eventually begin raising 2 daughters. However, this wouldn't last. The United States Drug Enforcement Agency, also known as the DEA, would eventually confront April at her doorstep, requesting that she return to her home state of Arkansas to testify against the drug ring she had helped investigate years prior. Still young and powerless in the presence of authority, she didn't have much of a choice. This is where things began to fall apart for April. As a result of her time in Arkansas assisting the police in court, several different notorious drug dealers from the area were arrested. And by several, I mean more than 30. It's at this point that April's decision to assist the police years ago after her DUI charge might have begun to seem like a mistake. As a result of that one decision to drive home under the influence, April was now responsible for the incarceration of a very large number of high-profile drug dealers in Arkansas. The scale of the drug ring quickly became apparent to everyone when it was discovered that they were operating from Arkansas to as far as Southern California. Adding even more fuel to the fire, her name was certainly known by those involved in the ring, and it's hard to imagine that they were very happy about what she had done. This sparked increasingly paranoid behavior in April, which began to drive a wedge between her and her family. She started to question whether or not she was being followed on her way home, and feared for the safety and security of both herself and her children. She refused to let her daughters sleep separately from her and stayed up all night watching over them, insisted on locks and surveillance equipment, and began to drink heavily to cope with her fears. All of this pressure seems to have built up after a while, eventually leading April into a serious mental breakdown. According to her mother, Gloria, quote, "April was never the same." This paranoid behavior is what ultimately led to the loss of custody over her 2 children. It was at this point that April decided she needed to move even farther away to protect herself. Although, yes, she was searching for a, quote, fresh start in California, it wasn't simply out of a zest for life as it originally seemed. No. This was an act made out of desperation and fear. It's also very important to mention the fact that April had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which certainly wasn't helping with her paranoia. Whether or not this means there really was evidence of people following her, or that it was just caused by her mental health condition, is still unclear. April moved to the small, unincorporated town of Newberry Springs, California, in the spring of 2004. It was shortly after her move that April, in conversation with her mother, would inform her that things were good and that she had a job as a waitress, as mentioned earlier. However, this was a lie. After moving to California, April's living conditions quickly began to decline. She was staying on the streets and even living in homeless shelters at times. As well as this, she would also become friends with a man named Chuck Hollister, who would take her in and let her live in his house. Another very important note is that Newberry Springs isn't exactly the place that you would go to see the world and start a new life. Instead, it's a town riddled with drug use as well as other illicit activities. In fact, the surrounding area has been dubbed by some as the methamphetamine capital of the world. The small town is... it's barely a town. If you look at these satellite images, you can see that it's basically just a bunch of roads and houses in the middle of the desert off a highway. One night in Newberry Springs, a man by the name of Mark Killebrew was driving down the highway when he saw a woman disheveled and distraught walking down the side of the road. He pulled over to check on the woman, and it was April. They seemed to have connected somehow after she explained her story, and he ended up bringing her home to his mother, Barbara, who befriended April and for whom April began working as a caretaker for a brief time. April would eventually confide in her new patient about the life that she had left back in Arkansas and Texas. She would tell her about her 2 young daughters and how she had left her situation with her ex-husband. The woman convinced April that she didn't belong way out here and that she had people who loved her and cared for her back home where she belonged. After considering this advice, she would call her mother and begin planning a trip back to Arkansas via bus. She would visit for a while before eventually heading back to Texas to be with her children and to reacquaint herself with the life she left behind. Only a few months after April's arrival in California on the 28th of June 2004, Chuck Hollister took April on the aforementioned drive around the neighborhood to say goodbye to her friends before Hollister claims to have dropped her off at the bus station. Eventually, April's mother, Gloria, received a call from Barbara, the woman she was taking care of, asking her how April was doing back at home. But when Gloria replied that April wasn't home, Barbara replied that she was positive that her daughter had departed for Arkansas the last time she saw her, and that she had even given her a white suitcase to pack for the journey. The two quickly deduced that something was very wrong, and eventually found out that nobody had even heard from April in over a week. She reportedly immediately tried to file a missing persons report, but was turned away by the police, stating that she probably was just off on some other excursion like she always is. They cited her depression as a reason for why she might have left, but to me, that sounds like it's all the more reason to go looking for her. Now, sadly, this is actually quite a common occurrence with missing persons cases, and it often leads to critical time being lost. April was reported as missing 18 days later on the 16th of July, 2004. Due to the San Bernardino County Police being aware of April's tendency to disappear across the country, they didn't exactly regard the case with any urgency. That is, until the rumors began flooding in. For some reason, word was going around that April may have been murdered and that her body was thrown down into a mine shaft in order to dispose of the evidence. The San Bernardino County Police, soon after these rumors began surfacing, would search deep within more than 25 mine shafts in the area surrounding Newberry Springs. However, nothing was found within any of them, and the police would hit a dead end. July would come and go, and so would the month of August, without any real concrete evidence of April's whereabouts following her allegedly being dropped off at the bus stop in late June of that year. However, an interesting development would be made in September. An employee working at Love's Truck Stop in Roseburg, Oregon, around 700 miles away from the town of Newberry Springs, came across some writing inscribed on a single tile on the wall while cleaning out the bathroom. It read, quote, "Want to find a missing girl from Arkansas? I-15, 3 miles east of Barstow." A large-scale search was conducted in the area around Interstate 15, east of the town of Barstow. Unfortunately, nothing would be found, and the police, despite the cooperation of the truck stop, were unable to determine the identity of whoever left the note on the bathroom wall. It would be 4 months before the next development when someone attempted to buy a cell phone in April's name in New Mexico. However, the authorities would be unable to decipher whether this attempt was actually made by April herself or whether it was someone else impersonating her for some reason. There really wasn't any other information about what this could have been. The following year, in 2005, the sheriff's department, for better or for worse, would make a breakthrough discovery. April's belongings were discovered scattered in and around the Red Dog Mine in Ludlow, California, around 30 miles from Newberry Springs. Even more strange is the fact that the Red Dog Mine was owned by a man named Dan Dansbury, who was a close friend of Chuck Hollister, the man who drove April to the bus stop the day she disappeared, as well as the last known person to have seen her alive. Things went cold again for a while before January 2006, when April's mother, searching for any clues in regard to the disappearance of her daughter, visited the Red Dog Mine herself and found April's white suitcase and various other clothing items that Gloria confirmed to be her daughter's. A bloody mattress was also found inside, but because it had been exposed to the desert elements for so long, it was of little forensic value.
Now, it's no surprise that April's mother, along with many others, believed that she was actually murdered as a result of her infiltration of the drug ring. She feels very confident that April is buried in a mine shaft somewhere and just hasn't been found yet. As a result of this, April's mother travels to all different kinds of mines all over the state of California several times a year in an attempt to find her daughter. She hopes to give her grandchildren some sort of answers as to what happened to their mother and to receive some kind of closure.
Our next story takes place around 300 miles east of Newberry Springs in the state of Arizona. It was the fall of 1994, and students of Arizona State University had been preparing for their fall semester of classes. Among them was Kimberly Nilson, a 24-year-old pre-med student with a promising future just ahead of her. This would be her final semester before graduation that spring of 1995. Kimberly had been scoring high grades throughout college and had a bright, unique personality. Tragically, however, she would never see the start of her first semester at ASU, because the first day of fall classes, August 22nd, 1994, would turn out to be the same date she was reported missing. Let's go back to the day before Kimberly disappeared. On August 21st, Kimberly called up her friends Steve Chambers and Jeff Sliga to see if they wanted to go on a bike ride with her. They both agreed to go. Although the two were mutual friends with Kimberly, they hadn't known each other prior to the bike ride. It quickly became clear that Kimberly wasn't her usual self. Shortly after the three met up, she would inform Sliga that Chambers was making her feel uncomfortable, but she wouldn't go into detail with him or explain what he was doing that made her feel this way. Following the bike ride, Kimberly would visit her friend Tor Staub's apartment. According to him, behaving as though she was preoccupied by something that she didn't wish to speak about. Apparently, she had continued her strange behavior while at his place, acting abnormally rude for no apparent reason. Tor made her a cup of herbal tea, but instead of thanking him and accepting the drink, she blew up at him, making a strange remark along the lines of, "Oh, so now I have to drink the tea before I leave," which didn't really make any sense. She would leave his apartment at around 1:00 p.m., apparently upset with Tor for, again, unknown reasons. 2.5 hours later, around 3:30 p.m., Kimberly's roommate reports that she had arrived back home and was vomiting in their bathroom. This clearly alarmed her roommate, who knocked on the bathroom door asking if Kimberly was all right. Still lashing out, Kimberly told her to go away and leave her be. Her roommate had noted other irrational behavior from Kimberly and believes that she was under the effects of peyote, which many others have concluded as well.
Now, peyote is a desert cactus which, when consumed, induces psychoactive properties. Unfortunately, Kimberly had been going through a sort of emotional crisis in the days before her disappearance. This was the result of a fairly tumultuous breakup with her boyfriend. Following her disappearance, the police would come across her diary, in which they would find the true extent of her emotional struggles, potentially too late.
Her diary detailed devastating recollections of her depression and other emotional struggles, as well as the fact that none of her friends had seemed to pick up on the fact that something was wrong with her. She also wrote about a series of horrifying nightmares she had been experiencing. These feelings of helplessness and alienation led her to search for an escape in any way that she could, eventually stumbling upon Native American herbs which claimed to support emotional healing. One of the specific drugs mentioned within a book Kimberly owned on the subject was peyote, which she seemed to have developed an interest in. Kimberly had also brought up peyote to her friends, who were aware that she had been attempting to get her hands on the drug. She would also disclose to some of them that she had been experimenting with mushrooms and marijuana as well. Following her nausea the afternoon prior to her disappearance, she would call in sick to work before falling asleep for several hours. A short while later, around 5:30 p.m. by that point, she spoke on the phone with Bob Leet, a friend of hers who she had been planning to go to the upcoming Lollapalooza festival with. They chatted about the festival for a short while, during which Kimberly seems to have been downplaying her illness to Bob. She stated that she likely just had a stomach bug and that she would still be attending the festival. That evening would be defined by a variety of strange phone calls. After her conversation with Bob, she would attempt to call her ex-boyfriend, but accidentally ended up calling a friend in Flagstaff. This friend reports that she went on talking, believing that she had actually reached her ex-boyfriend. It apparently took Kimberly a long while to realize who she actually had on the phone. Around 7 o'clock, she would call Bob again, informing him that she just had a strange dream, leading her to believe that she could no longer trust him nor Tor, before stating that she felt guilty about the way she had treated Tor while visiting his apartment earlier that day, and mentioning the fact that she wishes she hugged him before she left. It was now 9:30 at night, and Kimberly was still acting extremely erratic, making strange phone calls. She had a conversation with another male friend to see if she could come over to his house to wish him a happy birthday. Her roommate states that Kimberly left the apartment, but only for a short amount of time before coming back inside, insisting that she needed to call him back for better directions to his house. This was odd considering that she had visited him on numerous different occasions. Before long, Kimberly was back out the door before returning and then finally leaving the apartment for the last time that night. This might have been the last time she was ever seen alive. Now, I say might have because the timeline after this point gets very mysterious and unclear. The rest of the day comes and goes. It is now sunrise the following morning of August 22nd. More than 10 miles north in the desert city of Scottsdale, a pair of homeowners pull out of their driveway to begin running errands at 7:40 a.m. They were gone for a little over an hour before arriving back to their home around 9 o'clock, where they were shocked to notice a car blocking their entrance to the garage. The car was a black 1982 Volkswagen Rabbit parked neatly in their driveway. They had never seen it before. Police were eventually contacted, who quickly discovered that it was owned by none other than Kimberly Nilson. The authorities were perplexed to discover the keys still in the ignition.
While researching what happened at the home in Scottsdale, I found some conflicting information. Some state that the car had been locked, and others state that it was unlocked. Now, assuming that the car was locked, it's possible that Kimberly parked it in that driveway, didn't realize that the keys were still in the ignition, and locked herself out. However, if the car was unlocked, that seems to indicate that she had no intention of ever abandoning the car. Now, I'm not really sure which of these is more mysterious, but I'll leave that up to you guys to decide.
Back at Kimberly's apartment at 9:30 that morning, one of her friends arrived outside to pick her up for the first day of the semester. She wasn't there. When her roommate was questioned about where she could possibly be, she recounted Kimberly leaving to visit her friend the previous night, and that she thought she had seen her lying in bed that morning. Later on, though, she seemed to believe that she actually hadn't seen her in bed that morning. It's unclear whether or not she had returned to the apartment after visiting her friend. Once the police realized that they had a missing persons case on their hands, they made their way inside of her car to search for more information. They found a fanny pack which contained her checkbook, as well as her driver's license, which sat on the passenger's seat. On the floor, they discovered a page which had been ripped from her diary, containing a map to Tor's house scribbled on it. Police dogs were called in and were able to track her scent from the car heading up to the door of the house, perhaps indicating that she was seeking help of some kind. However, none of the homeowners answered the door. Eventually, the authorities would make it back to Kimberly's apartment, where they would search the missing girl's room. They found no peyote, but they did come across some marijuana. They also came across the book mentioning Native American herbs and their use for emotional and spiritual healing. There were 3 bookmarks inside, one page on peyote, another about yew trees, and one final page regarding emotional stress. There were, honestly, not many other clues about where she might have gone, and again, the details became very hazy after she left the apartment on the 21st. 7 months later, on the 12th of April, 1995, Kimberly Nilson was found. She was several miles away from where her car had been discovered in August of the previous year. Out near the foothills of the McDowell Mountains, a ranch hand looking for breaks in a barbed wire fence found Kimberly under a tree. She was in a clearing, surrounded by blooming cacti and creosote bushes. Only around 90% of her skeleton was found. The rest, along with her clothes and jewelry, were likely carried away by the desert winds and scavenger animals. She was given an autopsy where they found no signs of physical trauma, no signs of any puncture wounds, gunshot wounds, or broken bones. A stabbing or shooting in the midsection still wasn't off the table, however, and there was no way to tell if Kimberly had been strangled as the thyroid bone was missing. It's unclear how Kimberly died. Some of those close to her speculate that her death was a homicide. Others that it was simply an unfortunate accident, the result of drug-induced psychosis and confusion. One of her friends made the following statement about Kimberly. "She had so much life, and she was so happy. She never saw bad in you, never judged you. She was a wonderful friend who took you as you were. It is so ironic that her life was taken because she was so full of it."
This is obviously such an interesting case. I'm sure many of you are pretty sure you can piece together what happened here, and for good reason. It might seem obvious that Kimberly, out in the desert and under the effects of peyote, succumbed to the elements in a drug-induced psychosis. While this is certainly the most likely theory, there are still elements of it that are very difficult to explain. First, we know that Kimberly was already acting strange the morning before, on the 21st, during the bike ride. So, going with this theory, we can assume that she consumed the peyote before the bike ride. If this is the case, can we reasonably assume that she was still under the effects of the drug almost 24 hours later when she abandoned the car? So much so that she wandered into the desert of a very familiar area and couldn't find her way out? Second, again, there is no concrete evidence that she ever actually possessed peyote. Not in her car, not in her apartment, and not even according to her friends. A third unanswered question, it doesn't seem like she ever actually made it to her friend's house that night, so where did she disappear to for those 12 hours? For that matter, do we even know that it was her who parked the car in that driveway? I mean, she parked it apparently very neatly, which I'm not sure would have been possible under the effects of peyote. If she had been driving around all night, completely incapacitated, wouldn't she have parked the car a little crooked, or maybe wouldn't it have shown at least a little bit of damage? If she was really able to operate a vehicle so safely and carefully, how can we also assume that she wandered off into the desert in a city which she lived fairly close to? She would have been somewhat familiar with the area and should have been able to find her way out in that case. It's unclear exactly what happened here, or in any of these cases for that matter. Although theories exist for each of these mysterious desert disappearances, one thing's for sure. The sands of time will only ever uncover more questions than answers for some.